Have you ever been told that someone you loved was gone, only to find them alive, hiding the deepest betrayal? This isn't just a story of lies. It's a journey into secrets, revenge, and a plan so elaborate it blurred the line between life and death. On Cheating Stories 7, we dive into the shocking tale of a husband who discovered his wife's death was only the beginning of a far darker truth. Stay with us until the end because the twist will leave you breathless. So, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice makes this community stronger. Now, let's step right into today's story. They said my wife was dead, but she was in my bed. Betrayal and revenge. Seattle's rain threaded the office glass until the skyline blurred into a patient gray. Ethan Ward noted the time without looking at the clock. Schedules, delivery windows, the interval between a question and its answer. Numbers were the rails that kept the world from lying to him. Lately, he could feel the world straining against those rails. At home, there was a new citrus scent that lingered in the shower after late nights. Claire said a coworker recommended it. The bottle had no label. Her phone stopped landing face up. It learned to sleep beneath her palm. The purse began traveling to the bathroom. By themselves, none of these were crimes. Together, they drew a pattern that refused to stop repeating. He did not accuse. He observed. He watched Claire smile a beat too soon when he complimented her, watched that smile thin whenever Donovan Reed's name appeared, then return as if pushed back on stage. Donovan, his partner for 3 years, smooth, quick, persuasive, now looked too comfortable in places husbands should feel irreplaceable. Lily did not notice. 14, she moved through the house in her own weather, homework, playlists, a laugh that sounded like permission to hope. Ethan guarded that sound. It was the most expensive thing he owned and the only thing that never depreciated. Dinner brought garlic, steam, the even clink of cutlery. Claire set 2 plates and checked her phone between motions as if hunger were a notification. "How's the Henderson contract?" she asked lightly. She did not work with Henderson. She did not usually say contract. She was borrowing vocabulary she thought could make her invisible. "It's fine," Ethan said. He watched her eyes for the quick flinch that meant she cared for the wrong reason. Interest, then a rehearsed shrug. The oven timer beeped. She turned away like a soldier grateful for orders. His phone hummed. "Donovan, running point TMRW. Need your sign-off tonight?" The timestamp matched the moment Claire had said Henderson. The message proved nothing. It underlined the feeling that something coordinated was happening where he had assumed spontaneity. After Lily went upstairs, he loaded the dishwasher while Claire rinsed and stacked. They performed the quiet dance of couples who have not yet agreed to have an argument. When she reached for a towel, her sleeve lifted, and a thin stripe of unfamiliar perfume flashed along her wrist. When the house settled, he went to the study. The safe lived behind oak that matched the room. He keyed the code and listened. Doors breathe when they open and close. This one had been worked recently by hands that did not respect its rhythm. Inside, files were misaligned by a millimeter. Policy photocopies sat a folder deeper than they should. A contract summary wore a fingerprint that wasn't his. None of it ruined him. All of it predicted a future he would never choose. He put the folders back and called Samuel. His brother answered on the second ring. "Talk to me." "I need you to look into something quietly," Ethan said. "Claire, Donovan, if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. If I'm right, I need to catch up to a story that started without me." Samuel did not waste sympathy. "Usual rate, usual discretion, and unusual speed," Ethan said. "Start tonight if you can. Text me the numbers you want watched," Samuel replied. "And Ethan, if you're chasing certainty, you might not like how it feels when you catch it." Ethan ended the call and returned to the kitchen. Claire stood in the doorway, hair pinned up, the citrus faint. "You coming up?" "In a minute." When she left, he checked locks, cameras, thermostat. He texted Lily's friend's mother to confirm the weekend sleepover. The reply arrived at once, bright, precise, like a line read from a script. Upstairs, Lily had fallen asleep with a paperback open on her chest. He marked the page and slid the blanket higher. The room smelled like laundry and pencil shavings. He stood long enough to remember that this sound, the slow, even breath, was the thing he was protecting, not pride, not money. Then he stepped into the hall and let the old house creak around him. Back in the study, he wrote two names on the same line of a legal pad and drew a dark underline. He did not write their surnames. Names did not matter. The pattern mattered. The rain pressed its palm to the window. The city exhaled. In the morning, the counting would begin out loud. He did not plan to shout. He planned to rearrange the room until anyone who had lied had nowhere left to sit. He opened his laptop, mapped call times to calendar gaps, and watched the grid tell him what people didn't. Donovan's messages arrived in clumps after Claire's late nights. Claire's health app logged steps at hours that didn't belong to Jim's. Small numbers, honest in their way, confessing when placed beside one another. Downstairs, the dishwasher clicked, finished. In the backyard, a motion light woke, then decided there was nothing worth reporting. Ethan closed the blinds to teach the house how to keep its own counsel. He typed Samuel a final list, phone numbers, plate numbers, addresses that could be trusted, and those that should never have become familiar. He ended with a single sentence. If this is nothing, let it be nothing quickly. He shut the laptop and listened to the quiet. Houses know things. They memorize routines the way bodies memorize grief. This one had started to hesitate in doorways as if it no longer knew which version of the family to expect. He locked the study, turned off lights, and stood at the foot of the stairs. A father decides what to save first. Tonight it was sleep. Tomorrow it would be evidence. He went up slowly, step by step, and let the rain finish the conversation he was done having. In bed, Claire lay turned away, the angle of her shoulder exactly the angle she chose when she wanted statements to bounce. He watched the window until the glass admitted the faintest smear of city orange, then closed his eyes. He did not sleep. He counted, in reverse this time, until the numbers gave him back control. Morning would arrive on schedule, so would he. And when it did, the world that had been trying to lie would find fewer places to hide. 3 days later, the world had already redrawn itself into before and after. Samuel arrived at Ethan's office just before noon, his jacket still wet from Seattle's rain, a manila folder tucked under his arm like a verdict waiting to be read. He didn't sit. He placed the folder on the desk as though it might detonate if touched too casually. The first photo was a hotel bar lit in velvet shadows. Claire's smile tilted 3 degrees too private. Donovan's hand pressed against the small of her back as if the gesture was already permanent. The second was Donovan's car, leather seats polished, their mouths meeting in a kiss rehearsed for secrecy. The third was an unfamiliar apartment door, time-stamped on a Tuesday Ethan remembered as late call with the London team. 8 months of repetition, precision stitched into betrayal. Samuel spoke while Ethan studied the photos. Ivan Cole has been moving money through Delaware shells, crypto hops so small they look like dust until you sweep. Those transfers linked to Henderson's subcontractors, and Tommy Blackwell, the fixer, met Donovan twice last week. Burners pinged Henderson's foreman at 2:12 a.m. and again at 4:47 a.m. That isn't procurement, that's choreography. Scope. Ethan's voice was flat, the kind soldiers use when they've already accepted the wound. Big enough that grief would be their best cover, Samuel answered. Insurance in Claire's name could bankroll their exit. They run you soft for a month, move assets while everyone's sending casseroles and condolences. He slid a page across the desk, bank flows that looked like heartbeat monitors, steady, undeniable. The pattern didn't shout, it hummed. Divorce, Samuel suggested. Paper cuts instead of knives. You'll keep most of the company. You'll keep Lily. Courts make everyone read the same script, Ethan said. They reward whoever cries on cue. And while the paperwork crawls, Donovan empties the house on his way out. Samuel leaned back, watching Ethan the way a medic watches a patient who won't admit to pain. So what's your version? Ethan closed the folder, his reflection in the desk glass leaner, sharper, a man drafted into an earlier life. If Claire needs a corpse to collect her fortune, I'll provide one that stands up later. If Donovan needs gravity, I'll choreograph the fall. I need someone convincingly still without being dead. Military police, Samuel said, already scrolling his phone. Melissa Carter. She's been a training casualty for years. Doesn't rattle, doesn't bleed where she doesn't intend to. They met her in a downtown cafe that smelled faintly of reheated rain. Melissa arrived in a dark jacket, posture unflinching, eyes cataloging exits before ordering coffee. She shook Ethan's hand like a colleague. Melissa Carter. I need you seen by the right people at the right angle for the right length of time, Ethan said. He placed a velvet box between them. Inside lay Claire's necklace, a diamond that had witnessed anniversaries. You'll wear this. A medical examiner I trust will confirm what he can without lying with his hands. And the wife? Melissa asked, gaze steady on him, not the jewelry. Alive, contained, this is theater, not slaughter. Containment becomes captivity fast, she warned. I draw lines in ink, Ethan replied. No permanent harm, a clear timetable, payment in full before the curtain rises. She nodded once. Weather? Friday, Ethan said. Seattle always rains on cue. Samuel handled the signatures. Ethan handled the set. He replaced the house's cameras with ones loyal only to him, lenses that recorded what he told them when he told them. He rehearsed the angles like a director blocking actors. The bedroom lamp tilted the way Claire liked. A mannequin waited in her nightshirt, skin-toned silicone that fooled distance and dim light. Every lie, he knew, required one honest detail. Later, in a garage that smelled of damp rubber, Ethan met Tommy Blackwell. Donovan pays you to build doors, Ethan said. I'll pay you to decide who gets the key. You'll still take his money. You'll also take mine. Tommy's laugh was brittle. He's paying me to make him disappear. And I'm paying you to make sure I know which route he takes when he runs, Ethan said. He handed over an envelope heavy with both conscience and consequence. Send him the relocation list. Copy me without copying me. By the time Ethan returned home, the stage directions were set. The crash would happen late Friday afternoon on Highway 18. Melissa posed beneath fractured glass. The knock on his door would come hours later, Detective Harris delivering the script of grief. Alibis stacked neatly, receipts for wine, neighbors invited for an anniversary toast, a burner phone pinging the kitchen. Samuel stood in the study doorway, voice low. You sure about theater? Court's like simple. This isn't simple. It's clean, Ethan said. Clean is kinder than simple. Outside, the forecast promised rain. Inside, every angle had learned its cue. The ward house grew a second heart underground. Contractors came in shifts, believing they were building a wine cellar for a collector who valued silence more than labels. None of them guessed that the soundproofing doubled on itself until even regret could not echo. The chamber was not a dungeon. Climate control kept it temperate. Light panels mimicked dawn and dusk. A kitchenette with a stocked fridge promised dignity. A bathroom was tucked behind frosted glass. Yet the walls, steel dressed as drywall, forgot how to open for anyone except Ethan Ward. The handle did not exist. The only exit lived in his possession. To most eyes, it would look like a luxury suite without windows. To Ethan, it was a verdict wrapped in courtesy. Upstairs, the house obeyed differently now. Surveillance lenses no longer belonged to cloud storage or third-party servers. They belonged to him alone, each feed braided into the console in his study, private and loyal. He had rewritten the house's truth so it answered only when he called. At the desk, he wrote 2 letters in clean ink. The first was for Lily, sealed with her name, to be opened only if random chance, storm, bullet, accident interrupted his plan. Love has not left you, it said. It has only relocated, always pulling you forward. The second was for Samuel, concise, a schematic of the next 8 days. Theater requires witnesses who can tidy the aftermath. Both were locked in a drawer labeled if. Friday's storm had already been booked by the city's sky, but Ethan rehearsed anyway. He stood before a mirror and calibrated the angles of grief, eyes swelling without tears, voice cracking but not collapsing, hand clinging to a doorframe before letting go. He practiced hope and despair until they became muscle memory. Meanwhile, Samuel confirmed Lily's weekend with the Connors. Melissa Carter sent the reply herself, precise and polite, Of course, Lily is welcome to stay. Every period was military accurate. Ethan read it twice, noting the surname Carter, as if coincidence itself wanted to audition for irony. Tommy Blackwell delivered his whispers as instructed, a hint about audits, a rumor that Henderson's subcontractors were stirring suspicion, enough to make a guilty man believe time was collapsing. Donovan, impatient by nature, would accelerate his plan. That was exactly what Ethan wanted. Co-conspirators sprinting toward their own finish line. Receipts stacked on Ethan's desk like trophies. Wine shop at 4:02, gas station camera at 4:15, florist card at 4:23. Each timestamp a guardrail, ensuring the Ethan the world saw could never have engineered a disappearance. The room below waited, air faint with paint and electricity, fresh enough to betray how new it was. The bedspread turned down as though for a weary traveler. The flat-screen monitor blinked through test patterns, soon to carry live feeds of Ethan's performance upstairs. He stood in the doorway, palm brushing the cold steel edge. To outsiders, it might look like cruelty staged as hospitality. To him, it was mathematics. Claire had written the equation when she traded loyalty for Donovan's shadow. This room was only the answer, hidden until summoned. The house hummed with domestic order. Lily practiced piano upstairs, her notes uneven but hopeful. Claire hummed in the kitchen, a sound too light for the weight she carried. Ethan closed the steel door, locked it, and let silence swallow the key. Friday was waiting, and so was the verdict. Friday arrived on schedule, heavy with wet concrete and unfinished promises. Claire moved through the kitchen in a gray sweater, her face rehearsed for departure. She kissed Ethan's cheek lightly, the kind of kiss people give photographs, not people. "See you tonight," she said, and closed the door with punctuation too soft for the storm it carried. 2 neighborhoods away, a white van idled beneath dripping maples. Tommy Blackwell leaned against the hood, his smile rented by the hour. He opened the passenger door. "Final checklist," he murmured. Claire glanced at the syringe waiting beside a folded blanket. They had rehearsed this script, a dose to fog her memory, an alibi built on absence. She nodded once. The needle slid in with the efficiency of a lock turning. "You'll wake up when it's over," Tommy promised, because that was the line his kind always delivered. The van disappeared into rain and rumor. On Highway 18, trees bent inward as though sworn to confidentiality. Melissa Carter lay where wreckage and planning agreed she should, half-tilted beneath a fractured windshield, blonde wig matted by drizzle. Around her neck rested Claire's diamond necklace, catching the last light the weather allowed. The car was staged with careful violence. Hood crumpled, airbags spent, shards of glass scattered like salt across the road. Melissa slowed her breathing to near nothing, eyes half-fogged. The perfect casualty for a tragedy scripted in advance. Back at the ward house, a mannequin waited beneath the bedroom lamp, draped in Claire's nightshirt, jewelry gleaming with the lazy honesty of objects that don't understand context. Ethan placed a throw at the foot of the bed, the way Claire would have, and tilted the lamp to the angle she favored. Downstairs, he set 2 plates for an anniversary dinner that would never be eaten. Garlic lingered like an alibi. Receipts sat in his jacket pocket exactly where an officer would expect them. The knock came with blue-red certainty flooding the foyer. Ethan opened the door, his posture folding into that of a man still learning the rules of disaster. Detective Harris stood on the porch, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, a younger officer beside him. "Mr. Ward," Harris said evenly, "I'm sorry to deliver this. Your wife was in a collision on Highway 18. She died an hour ago." "No," Ethan said, stepping back, his hand clutching the doorframe as if gravity itself had betrayed him. "No, she's upstairs. She had a headache. She said she was going to lie down." The younger officer shifted, voice careful. "Sir, we have." "She's upstairs," Ethan repeated, insistent, desperate. "Please." He turned quickly, moving the way hope moves when it refuses arithmetic. The officers followed, boots respectful on hardwood. The bedroom lay in its staged stillness. The figure under the covers breathed nothing, obeying the lamp's shadow. Harris's hand twitched toward his holster, then stilled. The younger officer bent close, fingers to the mannequin's throat, searching for a pulse that wax would never grant. He drew back, unsettled, whispering, "Sir, this isn't." "What?" Ethan demanded, his voice climbing to a ledge. "What do you mean it isn't? She was here. She is here." Harris studied the wig that lay too neatly, the ring placed like a photographer's prop. He pocketed his questions. "When did you last see her, Mr. Ward?" he asked quietly. "What time did she lie down? Anyone else in the house today?" Ethan gave them times the world would confirm. Florist at 4, 23 wine shop at 4:02, the neighbor's wave at 4:40. He did not offer more. Grief rarely came with spreadsheets. They returned to the living room because tragedies always take visitors there. Neighbors arrived in pairs, arms heavy with casseroles, words heavier with sympathy. A friend pressed Ethan's shoulder too hard. Someone wept loudly enough to cover silence. Donovan Reed entered with the precision of a man auditioning for sainthood. He crossed the room swiftly, folded Ethan into a hug that looked almost like love. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, his voice braided with fury and sorrow, a performance designed to sell out a theater. To Harris, he added, "I spoke to Ethan an hour before dinner. He was home, excited. Anniversary plans." Harris wrote the line down, knew enough to shine. In the basement suite designed for silence, Claire woke like a swimmer surfacing too fast. Light panels mimicked morning. Her mouth was dry with cotton and lemon. "Hello," she called. The sound absorbed itself into walls that refused to echo. A screen flickered on. Upstairs, the feed showed Ethan on the sofa, face collapsed into geometry that made neighbors believe in his grief. Harris stood near the mantel, notes in his hand. Another angle showed Donovan at the door, palm pressed to Ethan's back as if blessing him. Rain rehearsed itself against every window. Claire pressed her palm to the glass of the screen. "Ethan," she whispered. The intercom crackled, his voice flattened into steel. "You're awake. What have you done?" she asked, her voice a smaller version of itself. "I finished your plan," Ethan said. "On paper, you're gone. In practice, you're safe. You wanted to vanish. I gave you the only version that spares Lily." She stared at Donovan, hugging her husband upstairs, her mouth bitter with disbelief. "He'll come for me." "No," Ethan said, not unkindly. "He'll save himself first." On Highway 18, paramedics zipped professionalism around Melissa's body, rain hushing their voices. In the ward living room, Detective Harris collected statements with the care of a man packing fragile boxes. Upstairs, wax and fabric played the role of the dead. Downstairs, Claire understood the category she now belonged to, alive but officially not. The city listened to the rain, and as usual pretended not to hear. Claire's consciousness climbed through fog, every breath dragging her toward a reality that no longer welcomed her. She opened her eyes to cream-colored walls and a neatly made bed, as though she had checked into a hotel that didn't believe in windows. A bathroom stood open to one side, the citrus soap on the counter so familiar it twisted her stomach. Donovan had once complimented that scent. Now it was proof that Ethan had been watching every detail. She pushed herself upright, muscles aching as if her body remembered a fight she had never fought. The wall screen flickered alive, and her prison became a theater. In the first frame, the ward living room glowed under soft lamps. Donovan embraced Ethan with the sincerity of a man auditioning for sainthood, palm firm on his back. "I'm here for you, brother," his lips shaped. Claire's chest tightened. She whispered his name into the room, but the screen only answered with silence. The image shifted. Crash site appeared. Paramedics crouched beside twisted metal, jackets glossed by rain, a medical examiner nodding gravely. On Melissa Carter's throat, Claire's necklace gleamed. To everyone else, it was tragedy. To Claire, it was mockery, a cruel reflection. She screamed. "Lily!" Her voice cracked and echoed only in her throat. She screamed again until the intercom flattened Ethan's voice through steel. "You wanted to vanish, Claire. I helped." "You're insane," she spat, throat. "No, I'm thorough," he said. 8 months of planning, every invoice paid, every route counted, Ivan's laundering schemes, Tommy's forged papers. The policy you thought was clever, I tallied it all. You invited wolves to the table and called it marriage. I'm only finishing your script. She cursed, threatened lawyers, police, noise. Ethan's pause carried no anger, only arithmetic. Noise has to travel, he said. These walls don't. The screen cut again. Lily appeared in her friend's kitchen, phone clutched, face folding as she was told the lie, "Your mother is gone." Claire pressed both hands to the monitor, begging the sound to break through. Lily folded in on herself, grief landing uninvited. The host mother comforted her gently, her kindness cutting Claire sharper than any blade. She sobbed until the room tilted. The intercom returned. "Now you see what choices require. You wanted wealth, escape, another name, and here is the cost. You will choose death permanent or exile permanent, but not yet. First, you must watch." Claire choked on her breath. "You can't." "I already did." His voice softened like a knife wrapped in velvet. "Rest, there's more to see." The screen rolled forward, neighbors arriving with casseroles, carrying sympathy like umbrellas, headlines spelling her name wrong, hashtags blooming. Strangers posted memories that never happened. Death, she realized, was easier for the world to believe than betrayal. The room smelled faintly of lemon and fresh paint, but beneath it lingered memory. She remembered Donovan's first touch on her wrist. She remembered signing the policy, believing it clever. Those choices now sat in front of her like locked doors she had built herself. She was alive but officially erased, watching her own funeral unfold in real time. She slid down the wall until she sat on the cold floor, tears hot against her skin. Above her, Ethan performed grief that no one doubted. Around her, the room performed hospitality that smothered. Inside her, a single question gnawed. Had she created this prison, or had Ethan been building it from the moment he first counted how long she stayed in the shower? The screen dimmed. The intercom went silent. She was left with the hum of the air system and the unbearable truth. The world above had already buried her. By morning, the ward house had learned how to host grief. Paper cups stacked beside a restless coffee maker, muffins arranged untouched, raincoats steaming by the door as neighbors filed in with phrases worn thin by repetition. Each condolence sounded borrowed, as if grief itself had a script. Donovan moved through the room like a man campaigning for sainthood. He gathered plates before they were empty, refilled cups before they cooled, lowered his voice when addressing Ethan as though sorrow were a child he refused to wake. His every gesture carried just enough weight to look effortless, just enough warmth to mask calculation. Detective Harris settled near the mantel, notebook balanced on his knee. He asked for times and received them in a clean syllabus. Florist at 4, 23, wine shop at 4, 02, neighbors wave at 4:40, phone ping placing Ethan at home. Each answer neat, unhesitating, plausible. Harris underlined nothing, but his eyes drifted to details grief rarely remembers. The lamp in the bedroom tilted at too perfect an angle, the absence of a water glass on the nightstand, the mannequin's obedient wig line. Donovan eased into Harris's orbit with the grace of a man who liked being believed. "I spoke to Ethan an hour before dinner," he said, careful but casual. "Contracts, schedules, nothing unusual." He sounded excited. It was their anniversary. Harris noted the words, his pen moving, his expression unreadable. "And you came when?" "As soon as I heard," Donovan said, glancing at his phone with a guilt that disguised itself as concern. "I'll help with arrangements, whatever he needs." He was good, too good. He performed care without overplaying it, stayed exactly as long as compassion demanded, left before suspicion could follow. His phone glowed often, drafts unsent, a screen waiting for a signal that would never come. In the room below, Claire watched him not call her. The camera widened when she needed it to lie and refused. "He's waiting for me," she whispered to the intercom. "He'll come when it's safe." Ethan's voice slid through, calm as arithmetic. "Fear redraws every map. It reroutes men toward exits that lock behind them." "Donovan isn't a coward," she snapped. "No," Ethan said, almost agreeing. "He's a strategist, which is worse if you were counting on him to choose you." Upstairs, Harris requested a quiet tour. He paused at the bedroom door, studying the bed like a painting whose brushstrokes betrayed the illusion, then returned to the living room without comment. He asked Ethan if he had family nearby. "A brother," Ethan answered. Samuel, he's handling what I can't. Harris did not write it down, but he remembered. On the coffee table, an envelope migrated from the desk without notice. Ethan caught it in time, sliding it into a drawer with his palm. A DNA kit unopened, returned weeks ago. He had not opened it, not because he feared truth, but because timing could cut deeper than betrayal. Some facts were better kept waiting. Donovan fetched napkins, offered condolences with surgical precision. Outside, the city rehearsed its grief. Hashtags bloomed, headlines blurred into pity, Claire's photo brightened by filters that gave strangers a memory they had never owned. Courts and policies would reward the plausible. No one would cross-examine sorrow offered at the right angle. By noon, casseroles had cooled into props. By 2, someone asked about funeral homes, their voice hushed with professional expertise. Donovan volunteered to make calls. Ethan let him. It gave Donovan something to do with his hands besides checking a phone that refused to deliver Claire back. Downstairs, Claire stared at those same hands on the screen, dialing lawyers, updating a fixer under false names, muttering about market turbulence. She waited for him to speak her name. He did not. He lied for himself instead of for her. "Do you see?" Ethan asked gently. "Loyalty to survival lasts longer than loyalty to love." Claire pressed her nails into her palm until crescents marked her skin. "You made this happen." "I accelerated it," Ethan said. "The ending was already written." Harris lingered longer than politeness required. He asked Ethan about ordinary things. Did Claire nap often? Tea or Advil for headaches? Where did she keep her keys? Ethan answered each with the precision of a ledger, not the warmth of memory. Harris made no expression, only closed his notebook, thanked Ethan, and promised to return. At the door, he turned back. "Who set the lamp?" he asked, voice almost casual. "Claire," Ethan said, unblinking. "Before the headache." Harris nodded, hat tipping against the drizzle, filing away a private note, lamp angle too perfect. He didn't know what it meant yet, but he knew rehearsals when he saw them. Evening thinned the house. Guests left carefully, as though stepping away from a stage where grief was still playing. Donovan squeezed Ethan's shoulder, promised to return with suits and schedules, then drove off to call his fixer. "We move tonight," he told him. "Or not at all." The voice on the other end said only understood. In the basement, Claire pressed her forehead to the screen, watching Donovan become smaller, narrower, a man choosing himself above all else. Ethan's voice reached her again, steady. "The camera doesn't lie, it doesn't interpret, it only records what people think they've hidden." Claire turned her face to the wall. Upstairs, rain washed the windows clean of evidence. Downstairs, truth became its own captivity. Ethan applied pressure the way a surgeon closes an artery, precise, silent, decisive. By mid-morning, 2 men with polished badges and federal voices sat in Ivan Cole's office. Their pauses were as heavy as their questions were light. They mentioned audits the way people mention weather already rolling in. They spread terms across the desk like coasters, cooperation, immunity, timelines. Ivan cracked before anyone raised their voices. "It wasn't me," he blurted, the words rushing out like air from a punctured tire. Donovan had the authorizations. He set the sub-accounts. Henderson line items, relocation expenses, vendor escrow. I just optimized. The words sounded ugly in the room. He kept talking, faster, producing spreadsheets that looked more like confessions than records, pointing to crypto hops so small they resembled dust until they lined up into a siphon. "Walk us through Henderson," an agent said pleasantly. Ivan did. Transfers disguised as rounding errors routed through Delaware shells, consolidated offshore on weekends when no one looked. He named dates. He named a burner number that called only at 2:12 a.m. and 4:47 a.m. He named Donovan aloud, and his face almost relaxed at the sound of syllables leaving his mouth. Upstairs, the ward house had become a quiet command center. Melissa Carter watched the feeds from Ethan's study, posture tense, eyes betraying a new weight behind her ribs. Her job was simple, be convincingly dead without dying, but the scope had widened until it blurred. This wasn't containment anymore, it was erasure. She asked Ethan for 5 minutes. He granted them. You told me no permanent harm, she said, jaw tight. No one will be physically harmed, Ethan replied. The law will handle what it already owes them. She let out a hollow laugh. This is theater with real props. Ethan didn't flinch. He slid a folder across the desk. Insurance policies, bank transfers, contracts doctored in Donovan's name, Lily's name underlined in a policy margin like collateral in someone else's gamble. They wrote this play. I'm only publishing it. Your role hasn't changed. You survive. Melissa's eyes lingered on Lily's name, the ink heavy and permanent. Argument collapsed where precision stood. She nodded once and left, her conscience heavier but intact. In the study's corner, Samuel pinned Henderson contracts to a corkboard, marking siphons in red until the bland language looked like a blood test. Here, he said, those miscellaneous transfers, that's the river, he staged it. Good, Ethan answered, juries need rivers. You planning to invite one? Samuel asked. I'm planning as if they could walk in any moment and making sure they won't have to. The agents left Ivan with a business card and the offer of sleep for men who confessed early. Ivan folded into himself, then immediately called Donovan. Fear outran wisdom. They know, he hissed. About the flows, about Henderson. Donovan swore, then shifted to triage mode. Move nothing, sit still, touch nothing. But fear is a cartographer. Stillness blistered Donovan's instincts. Within the hour, he was on a secure laptop, tunneling into accounts he swore he'd never touch without Claire's signal. He authorized transfers across borders, logs updating, flags raising in offices where compliance officers did not keep bankers' hours. Downstairs, Claire watched the screens, her breath shallow. Please, Ethan, she begged into the intercom. Stop. If they arrest him, he'll never survive prison. Which freedom would you trade? Ethan asked, voice scalpel sharp. His survival or Lily's right to a life not built on theft? Claire shut her eyes. No honest answer surfaced. In Ethan's desk lay the sealed DNA envelope. His palm rested on it once, then lifted. Timing mattered. Truth could destroy more than lies if delivered at the wrong moment. Melissa passed the study again, pausing at the threshold. If this ends in blood, I walk. It won't, Ethan said. Not because I'm kind, because I'm careful. Careful and kind sound the same to children, she warned. Remember that when you calibrate your next move. Detective Harris, not yet summoned, wrote his own private ledger. He replayed Donovan's polished condolences, the lamp's impossible precision, the mannequin's obedient stillness. He read Henderson's public filings over lunch, circling vague contingency expenses that looked too much like shadows on paper. Questions gathered, unspoken, heavy in his pocket. By evening, the air felt charged. Donovan's fixer replied with an EDA, a packet of new identities and exit routes. Donovan called his lawyer, his voice syrupy with fear. Hypothetically, what happens if a partner misallocates funds under duress? His lawyer sighed. Hypothetically, you'll need a better adjective. Claire pressed her forehead to the screen when Lily appeared again, laughing through red eyes at her friend's joke. Even bruised by grief, Lily's life insisted on moving forward. Claire sobbed into her palms. I'll sign anything. I'll agree to anything. Just don't let them take Donovan. Ethan's reply was almost gentle. He built his own cage. I'm only making sure it closes. Samuel taped the final red mark on the corkboard. The map was complete. Intent, method, benefit, concealment. A story even a tired judge could follow. We're ready, he said. Then we wait, Ethan answered. Somewhere across town, Donovan pressed send on an offshore transfer large enough to make a banker flinch. He thought he'd outrun the storm. What he didn't hear was paperwork waking in offices where men with real badges worked nights. The board was set. Every piece had been taught its lines. The next move belonged to whoever still believed choices were plentiful. Sirens arrive the way storms do, first as rumor, then as weather. A convoy stopped outside Donovan Reed's building, red-blue light pulsing against wet brick until curtains twitched. Detective Harris stepped out into the drizzle with real backup and warrants that stood straighter than any man. Paperwork has posture. These papers carried steel. Inside, the hallway smelled of carpet glue and apologies. Harris knocked once, then let authority turn the lock. The door was called a door for the last time. Donovan stood barefoot in an expensive sweatshirt, his hair still deciding which way to fall, his face slack with the disbelief of someone who had rehearsed the wrong play. Yesterday he was comfort. Today he was a defendant. "Donovan Reed," Harris said, voice professional calm. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy." The cuffs clicked with the decisive sound of a lock recognizing its true owner. Donovan tried to summon charm, but found only breath. He looked for a script, discovered silence instead. "I want my lawyer," he muttered. "You'll have him," Harris replied, already reciting rights that separated order from vendetta. Behind him, other detectives began the polite burglary that warrants authorize. Drawers pulled open, hard drives sealed in patient blue tape, phones bagged like dangerous animals. On the kitchen counter, a laptop still glowed with the confirmation of an offshore transfer, numbers lined like confessions. In another room, a muted television murmured headlines, Ethan Ward's name floating beside words like loss, resilience, leadership. By afternoon, anchors would praise him as the executive who survived both tragedy and betrayal. Shareholders would call him resilient. Markets would nod in relief that someone else was bleeding. At headquarters, Ivan Cole had already purchased cooperation with confession. He poured his story into pages, sprinkling words like fiduciary duty and under pressure, hoping vocabulary could soften guilt. It might trim years off his sentence. It would not change what the paper said. In the Ward house, Melissa Carter watched the arrest unfold on a muted feed. She didn't gloat. She measured. Samuel took a call from Harris and gave back the right words in the right order, then exhaled like a soldier after the blast misses by inches. Down in the hidden suite, Claire's body collapsed as Donovan's image appeared in handcuffs. "You killed him," she whispered, not his pulse, but the narrow future he had built for them. The heat of foreign beaches, new names whispered like vows, stories told to men who loved ambition more than truth. Ethan answered without joy. "He built his own noose. I only moved the beam where everyone could see it. You could have stopped before this." "I could have," he admitted, "but stopping wouldn't have saved Lily, and saving her is the only measure that counts." Detective Harris returned to the Ward home later than cameras, earlier than rumor. He stood in Ethan's living room again, watching a man who didn't grin on graves, no giddy relief, no triumph. Only the steady calm of someone who believed outcomes mattered more than feelings. Harris wrote that calm down in his mind, alongside lamp angles and mannequin wigs, unsure which belonged to truth and which to wax. "Mr. Ward," he said quietly, "we'll need you to give a formal statement tomorrow." "Of course," Ethan replied. "Our office will also contact you regarding the recovery of company assets." "Whatever helps," Ethan said. "I want the facts to be louder than the grief." Harris almost smiled at the line. On his way out, his gaze lingered on the study door. Homes keep secrets behind wood and brass. He didn't yet know about the sealed DNA envelope waiting in Ethan's desk drawer, silent as an unexploded charge. He only knew that something in this story was made of bone and something else of wax, and the balance had not yet declared itself. News crawled, comment sections swelled. The city, hungry for clean narratives, turned away from tragedy toward justice. Justice photographed better cuffs, seized boxes, men led between officers with faces trained into masks. Donovan's walk replayed on every channel, each angle shaving sympathy thinner. Reporters said alleged for legal safety, then everything else as if it were gospel. In a fluorescent interview room, Donovan tried to turn charm into gravity. His cuffed hands flexed. His lawyer straightened his tie, his face heavy with billable hours. "To be clear," Donovan began, rehearsing words that had never served him. The camera in the corner didn't believe him. Neither did the numbers on his laptop. In the Ward house, night settled. Ethan opened his desk drawer, touched the sealed DNA envelope, then closed it again. Some truths were weapons. Timing decided who bled. Upstairs, Lily, safe with the Connors, learned a new survival skill: how to laugh for 10 seconds before the ache returned. Children get better at that. They have to. In the hidden suite, Claire sat on the floor and whispered the question she had no answer for. Was love ever separate from ruin, or had ruin always been its twin? The rain pressed its hand to the city, and the city, as usual, pretended not to feel it. The funeral was elegant and empty, a ceremony built to impress the living more than honor the dead. An immaculate casket crouched beneath a tent the color of respectable grief. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers along the path. The groundskeeper had rolled the grass in neat stripes, making mourning look organized. Above it all, the choir of weather kept time on the canvas, steady as any hymn. Ethan wore the black that turned men into monuments. He stood at the lectern with a sheet of paper he didn't need. "Claire," he said, letting the name rest with the crowd before saying more. He praised her with careful honesty, the laugh instead of the fights, the summers instead of the winters. He borrowed words from a time before betrayal, and the crowd accepted the loan without question. When he said mother, Lily's shoulders lifted once and did not fall again for 10 long seconds. Lily cried in silence, a discipline that left no stains. Her hand clutched Ethan's sleeve as though touch alone could anchor her to gravity. Friends closed around her like bookends. At the edges of the gathering, Detective Harris kept his hat in his hands and his questions in his pocket. Melissa Carter, hair tucked under a plain cap, watched from a distance, her eyes locked on the casket that owed no one a body. The pastor spoke of mercy and the arithmetic of days. Rain ticked against the tent. People nodded, as people do when words like peace that passes understanding are spoken. A dove startled from the oak, and someone decided it meant something. After the final amen, the mourners filed forward. They gripped Ethan's hand, touched Lily's shoulder, signed their names in the guest book as though ink could fasten a family to the earth. Down in the hidden suite, Claire watched her own funeral through the calibrated feed. She saw the casket, the umbrellas, the neighbor from Bellevue with the immaculate hedge, the way Ethan's voice softened when speaking her name, the way Lily's braid loosened under rain. She understood that rituals did not require bodies, only consensus. The city had agreed she was gone, and so she was. After the cemetery, the house filled again with food no one tasted. Tables sagged under deviled eggs and pies carried in with care. Neighbors spoke of Claire in present perfect. She was always, she loved to, until grammar itself finished the crying for them. Harris stayed long enough to thank Ethan for his composure, then tipped his hat gently to Lily and left, carrying away questions he would not yet unpack. When the door closed on the last guest, Ethan stacked plates as though order alone could calm chaos. The dishwasher hummed to life. He crossed the hall to his study, opened the hidden door, and descended into the chamber where grief had been sharpened into verdict. On the screen, Claire's face appeared pale, eyes hollow from watching herself buried. The intercom breathed. "It's done," Ethan said. "You buried air," she whispered. "I buried a story the city could live with." She laughed once, a sound rejected by the ceiling. "And what story do I live with?" "The one you wrote," Ethan said, not cruel, not kind, only exact. He didn't sit, he didn't pace. He gave her doors instead, each one labeled. Door 1, you stay dead. Lily inherits a safe version of her mother's love. Insurance pays. The trust protects her future. She grows without scandal shadowing her. Claire swallowed hard, the citrus on her wrist rising like a bad memory. "And door 2, you resurface," Ethan said. "The insurance claws back, civil suits pile high. Lily's trust freezes. Her name stains in filings that outlive her bones. She learns words like fraudulent conveyance and predicate act. The trial builds a museum exhibit out of our kitchen. She hates the mirror because it belongs to you." "You always loved closure more than kindness," Claire said bitterly. "I don't believe in magic," Ethan replied, "so I don't invent a third door." He paused, letting silence do its arithmetic. "1 week, choose, and I'll obey it." Her voice shook. "And if I choose life, then you live as someone else, or you live as yourself and ruin the one person who never volunteered." His tone did not waver. "You can't keep both the cake and the candle." Claire pressed her thumb hard into the blanket seam, leaving a crescent. "You're sentencing me." "I'm giving you jurisdiction over your sentence," he said quietly. 1 week. Above them, Lily drifted into the living room and placed a single photograph on the mantel, a snapshot of her and Claire at a beach in July. Ethan turned the camera away to give his daughter privacy from her mother. On the monitor, Claire flinched as if the lens itself had struck her. A late neighbor knocked upstairs, murmured condolences, left behind a dish the size of an apology. Ethan did not move for 5 counts, then spoke into the intercom. 1 week. He switched off the channel. The room kept its lemon scent, steady as a crime no one would prosecute. Claire turned her face to the wall. She hated him for being right. She hated herself more for understanding. Bethany Hale. That was the name printed on the new driver's license. Edges crisp, numbers freshly minted, a person born not from blood but from paperwork. Claire Ward had died on a rainy Friday evening. The newspapers confirmed it. Neighbors whispered it. The insurance company filed it. But Bethany breathed the thin air of a Montana town where no one knew her favorite wine, her daughter's laugh, or the way she once rehearsed lies like prayers. The apartment above the hardware store was modest. Its balcony barely held a chair, but it held memory too stubborn to leave. The town pulsed on slower blood. Deliveries arrived at the same time each week. The diner closed its doors when the sun dipped, and the library lights flickered off at precisely 7. Life here asked for patience, not ambition. The rules were precise, as Ethan had promised. No phone calls, no research, no return tickets, and in exchange, once a month an unmarked envelope slid beneath her door. Inside, photographs of Lily, her daughter smiling with friends, holding a trophy, blowing out birthday candles, proof that Lily was alive, growing, untouched by courtrooms or cameras. Bethany would press those photos to her chest, tears falling silently so the neighbors wouldn't hear. She pinned the first one behind a cupboard door, hidden shrine, private altar. One evening, temptation betrayed her. In the public library, she typed Seattle Times into the search bar, searching for any scrap of news about Christian Industries. The headline had barely formed when the screen went black. Minutes later, a man in a dark suit appeared at her apartment door. Polite as a banker, firm as a verdict. He reminded her of what she had signed, of how fragile freedom became when rattled too loudly. She nodded, forced a smile, and never tried again. Life pared itself down to essentials. The creak of boots on wooden stairs, the bell over the shop door, the smell of cut lumber drifting up from below. At night, she counted her breaths until sleep arrived, practicing exile the way some people practice prayer. Survival wasn't freedom, it was repetition. Back in Seattle, Ethan opened his desk drawer. The sealed DNA envelope lay where it always had, silent as a fuse. He hadn't opened it, not because he feared the truth, but because timing itself was a weapon. Some truths waited for the ground beneath Lily's feet to turn into stone. Bethany Hale closed her eyes and whispered a name she was no longer allowed to say. To the world, she was gone. In every practical sense, she was. Yet the envelopes kept arriving, and as long as they did, she knew Ethan was watching from a distance, guarding Lily's innocence with the same precision he had used to dismantle betrayal. Exile, she realized, wasn't punishment alone. It was a life sentence written in someone else's handwriting, and the only way to survive was to read it exactly as it was written, without ever trying to rewrite a single word. Avery Pike was never brave. He was simply the kind of man who could smell loose mortar in other people's walls. He had subcontracted long enough on the Henderson job to hear names whispered when paperwork grew shy. One night in a bar thick with smoke and secrets, he caught a sentence that didn't belong in casual conversation. Ward's wife didn't die. New name, Montana. The speaker laughed into his beer, calling it a rumor. Avery didn't believe in rumors. He believed in price tags. He began with trespasses small enough to pass for curiosity, backed up vendor emails, courier manifests, a storage receipt signed by a hand still learning its new alias, Bethany Hale. The letters sat oddly on the page like a borrowed coat still smelling of another life. Cross-referencing invoices, he found a hardware store 2 states away. From there, the outline of leverage sharpened, not proof, not yet, but whispers with teeth. At a steakhouse, Avery scribbled a number on a napkin, slid it into an envelope, and mailed it to Ethan Ward's downtown office. No theatrics, no threats. Just a note, how much to keep Bethany Hale a ghost. Call. He liked the elegance of it. Greed, after all, could look polite when dressed in cursive. The envelope reached Ethan between condolence flowers and quarterly reports. He studied the handwriting as though it were a match held over dry kindling. He didn't call. He handed the envelope to Samuel. "Find the draft that thinks it can write itself," he said coldly. Wolves behaving like wolves was never news, it was schedule. In Montana, the rumor arrived differently. A roofing supplier leaned on the hardware store counter, voice careless. "Seattle's been wild since that Ward crash. Folks say Montana's perfect for starting over. Right, Beth?" He grinned without malice, but the words landed like sparks on oil. Bethany smiled with borrowed teeth, stacked receipts until her hands stopped shaking, and understood instantly that her life was a house of contracts, one spark away from burning. That night, fear made her reckless. She rode a bus 2 towns over, paid cash for a prepaid phone, and dialed Samuel Ward's emergency line from the vestibule of a church that smelled of lemon oil and dust. 9 words, nothing more. "Check the locks on the blue unit. Not safe." Then she broke the phone, bought coffee she didn't drink, and rode back to exile with guilt gnawing at her ribs. Samuel traveled quietly. At the hardware store, he bought screws he didn't need, tape he might, and asked for directions to the fairgrounds. In the feed aisle, Bethany met him with eyes wide and wet. They didn't hug. They didn't use names. She whispered Avery Pike and napkin and number. She admitted breaking the rules that kept Lily safe. Samuel listened, steady as stone. "You did the wrong thing," he said at last. "I won't let him sell a child's future for a payday." "You'll tell Ethan?" she asked, throat dry as paper. "I'll tell him enough," Samuel said, "late enough that he can't pull the wrong lever." His eyes fell on the church bulletin poking from her bag, read the line about potluck schedules, and allowed himself one flicker of mercy. "No more calls, no more risks. If he reaches you, you hang up and walk into the nearest store with cameras." Back in Seattle, Samuel dropped the napkin onto Ethan's desk. "Avery Pike, scavenger, former Henderson orbit. He thinks he's found a crack." Ethan studied the napkin as though it were an animal capable of biting. His jaw set with cold satisfaction. He had been right about wolves. Yet beneath that satisfaction lay something sharper. Bethany had risked everything to protect Lily. Samuel had chosen the child's safety over his brother's choreography. Ethan recognized both moves. He had built a world where survival sprinted faster than ethics. "What do you want done?" Samuel asked. "I want him to believe he can name the price," Ethan said. "And then I want him to learn he's been paid in a currency he can't spend." "Lawful corridor," Samuel murmured, already seeing the outline of Act 12. "Lawful," Ethan confirmed. "And clean, Harris will be invited to see enough." That night, Avery Pike waited for a call that didn't come. He sent another envelope, uglier this time. Secrets depreciate. He rehearsed his threat in the mirror, picturing a negotiation ending with a briefcase and a warning. He imagined leaving richer, his story sharp enough to impress men who applauded bad news well told. In Montana, Bethany stood on her narrow balcony counting breaths until fear released her. On the kitchen table, the monthly envelope lay open. Photos of Lily laughing in a library, flour-dusted in a kitchen, smiling with a scraped knee and defiant eyes. Bethany touched each one like a prayer and promised the night ere she would not be brave again. She had learned that bravery was only another word for wanting what you cannot keep. In Seattle, Ethan sat in his study with the sealed DNA envelope under his palm. He didn't open it. Some truths were grenades waiting for the wrong thrower. Instead, he dialed a number Detective Harris would answer after one ring. "There's a man who thinks he can sell me a secret," Ethan said. He didn't say my wife. He didn't say Montana. He said just enough to build a corridor with walls a badge could accept. They built the corridor the way careful men build bridges. No gaps wide enough to fall through, no nails left proud. Samuel laid the scaffolding. Dates, call records, storage logs from the blue unit Avery Pike had sniffed around. a neat lattice of chain of custody strong enough to carry a badge. Ethan set the lighting. A room that looked like negotiation but sounded like deposition. Microphones that filed everything as exhibit instead of memory. Detective Harris was invited, not fully inside but close enough to witness. "Observer," Samuel said, setting a spare chair at the edge of the table. Harris accepted the word. Observers testify to temperature without claiming they control the weather. Avery Pike arrived with swagger he had borrowed from men more dangerous than himself. He chose the restaurant, a converted bank with brass rails and a vault door for ambience, and sat beneath the old clock like he was keeping time. He slid the same napkin number onto the table, confident ritual could sanctify extortion. "We can be adults," he said. "You buy silence, I keep the ghost a ghost." Samuel leaned forward, voice calm as liturgy. Before numbers, clarity. Ethan kept his hands still on either side of an empty glass. His tone was scalpel sharp. "State your claim." Avery smiled as though presenting a menu. "Claire Ward, new name Bethany Hale, Montana, hardware store. I don't need to prove it to you, you already know. My proof is reserved for people who pay late." Harris noted the tightening in Ethan's jaw, the small incline of Samuel's head. Both gestures told him they had already heard the chorus. "Extortion," Samuel said mildly, opening a folder. Inside lay photographs of Avery at the Blue Unit keypad, timestamps kissing Donovan's last transfers, screenshots of logins that weren't his. Computer trespass, receiving stolen access, attempted interference with an investigation. Avery's grin clipped short. "Investigation," he repeated as if the word itself were an exit. "Mr. Pike," Harris said from the edge, neutral as a scale. "You're in a room with 3 men. One isn't planning to hurt you. 2 will legally if you press them. Choose carefully." For the first time, Avery hesitated. "You think you can scare me with paper?" Samuel tapped the folder. "This ties you to Donovan's final transfers. If a prosecutor needs glue, you are Elmer's." Ethan finally moved, placing a pen across the table like a bridge. "Or you can cooperate now. Give us the truth. Walk out on the witness side of the aisle." Avery's bravado thinned. "What understanding?" "Proffer," Harris said. "Limited use. You tell the truth in this room, we use it to chase bigger crimes, not to pin you to the wall if you don't lie." Evidence bloomed. Courier manifests, vendor inboxes mirrored from stolen accounts. The second envelope scrawled "Secrets depreciate." Handwriting matched to his rental application. An IP address traced to the same coffee shop Donovan had used before sending funds offshore. Coincidence wilted on Avery's lips. Opportunists prefer rails to footing. "Fine," he said, hands up, the universal plea for mercy. "I'll sign. I'll name names. I'll give you the subcontractors, the Henderson foreman, anyone who muttered Montana out loud. I don't care about the woman. I just want a chair at my own table next month." Samuel slid him a clean page. "Spell them." Avery spelled them, dates, connections, whispered corridors. When he tried to edit his worst paragraph, Harris coughed once and the truth reappeared. It ended not with sirens, but with signatures. Harris collected the proffer, the recordings, the seals. Samuel promised the ghost would stay a ghost so long as no one tried to trade her like currency. Ethan shook no hands. He nodded once at Harris, acknowledgement between craftsmen, and left with the quiet aura of a man rumored to be unkillable. Outside, brass reflected a city that adored clean endings more than complicated honesty. Samuel paused on the steps, knowing he had burned a bridge to a simpler life. Harris returned to his desk, drafting a letter he might never send, addressed to Lily Ward, 21. It described mannequins, lamps, and truths that sometimes outran rules. He folded it, slid it into a drawer, and decided silence was safer than aftermath. That night, Bethany watered a plant on her Montana balcony while the sky decided to forgive the day. In Seattle, Ethan rested his palm on the sealed DNA envelope in his desk. He didn't open it. Some truths wait for ground that won't collapse beneath a child's feet. Upstairs, Lily fell asleep with a pencil still in her hand, flag of ordinary life. The corridor held. The walls were lawful. The story, for once, chose to end softly where it could have torn, years folded into photographs. They lived on a mantle in Seattle and inside unmarked envelopes that traveled quietly to Montana. Lily grew in clean margins, debate team ribbons, varsity letters that no one bragged about, study groups perfumed with coffee and pencil graphite. She laughed longer now, slept without rehearsing alarms, learned to say her mother's name in the past tense without breaking. She never stood in a courtroom. That had always been the point. Ethan measured time in smaller rituals. Thursday pasta, movie nights on the couch, 2 questions after school that invited honest answers. The company recovered, expanding cautiously, shareholders applauding his resilience. At home, his victories were quieter. He never opened the sealed DNA envelope in his desk. It waited, patient as ash. Timing still mattered more than truth. Samuel came on Sundays, carrying takeout and silence that fit the house. Detective Harris sent Christmas cards with a photo of a dog instead of a family, practicing privacy like a new religion. Melissa Carter mailed a single postcard from a distant training site, still breathing. The handwriting was steady, square, unafraid. In Montana, Bethany Hale stacked invoices at the hardware store, watered a plant on her balcony, and kept her life folded into repetition. She never searched Seattle again. Each month an envelope arrived. Lily at a science fair, Lily grinning with friends at a windswept beach, Lily mid-laugh in a kitchen that no longer smelled of citrus. Bethany hid the photos behind a cupboard door but returned to them nightly, an altar no one else could see. The invitation arrived with the rest of senior mail, embossed crest, auditorium map, parking instructions that assumed fathers understood traffic better than emotion. Lily stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a lemon and said, "We made it," without clarifying who we meant. Ethan touched the edge, nodded, and bought a suit that didn't need tailoring. His calendar obeyed. Graduation day filled the auditorium with the hum of civic pride. Programs rustled, cameras blinked, applause practiced itself. Ethan sat among the crowd and borrowed their belief that the world had been mostly fair. Across the aisle, a woman in a baseball cap slipped into the shadows. Short, dark hair, plain jacket, anonymity worn like armor. Bethany broke one rule for 1 hour. She watched only Lily, the tilt of her chin, the way she smoothed her gown when she thought no one noticed, the whisper to a friend that bloomed into a grin. Bethany's hand stayed folded tight, fingers locked as though guarding a gate. When Lily's row stood, she finally exhaled. Ethan saw her. He had trained himself never to miss what others tried to hide. He didn't startle. He didn't point. He simply looked across the aisle, found her eyes, and nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was stewardship, a shared acknowledgement that they had carried a choice across years without dropping it. They looked away in the same moment, divers resurfacing but refusing air. Then Lily's name was called. She crossed the stage steady, shook the principal's hand, smiled the way the future demands. The auditorium applauded for the right reasons. Ethan clapped until his palms stung and let himself think the word done without saying it. When he looked back, the shadowed seat was empty. Bethany had already walked out past the alumni posters, down an aisle that didn't squeak. Outside, she sat in her car, tears falling in careful silence, then drove to a motel 2 towns over. She showered too long and slept without dreams. That evening, after cake and photos, Ethan's phone buzzed. An unlisted number. 2 words, "thank you." He deleted the message, not because gratitude was dangerous, but because records were. He set the phone face down, stepped outside, and let Seattle's evening breathe around him. Traffic smeared light across wet streets. Somewhere, a bus hissed. For one unmeasured moment, he allowed himself the luxury of breathing without schedule. Then he returned inside to stack plates and argue good-naturedly with Lily about which restaurant would own their next decade of rituals. Upstairs, the small envelope in his desk drawer waited as it always had, patient as stone. Tonight, it was enough that she had crossed a stage the world could see. Detective Harris had once believed truth was a disinfectant, sting first, heal later. Years taught him otherwise. Some wounds didn't want light, they wanted stitches. On a gray Sunday morning, he sat at his kitchen table and addressed an envelope to a future tense. Lily Ward, to be opened on your 21st birthday. He dated the corner, then began to write. He wrote about the mannequin first because beginnings mattered. The lamp angled too perfectly, the wig line too obedient, the wax skin that could never host a pulse. He explained how grief could be rehearsed without being fake, how good men learned the choreography of loss for reasons that were not lies. He described the room beneath the Ward house, no windows, citrus soap, a door that forgot how to open except for one man. A father who believed outcomes were the only apologies that lasted. Next, he wrote about the arrest. Sirens, warrants, cuffs, paperwork with teeth, cameras that preferred justice over grief. Donovan Reed's name stitched into charges of embezzlement and fraud. How the city, hungry for a clean narrative, ate justice faster than it had mourned tragedy. Harris admitted in ink what he had never said aloud. He suspected Donovan's downfall wasn't coincidence but choreography. He turned to the last corridor. The converted bank, the napkin with a number. Avery Pike swaggering in for negotiation and walking out inside a deposition. Microphones, signatures, evidence that bloomed like iron filings under a magnet. He confessed that he had been invited only to observe, and sometimes observing was the bravest thing the law could do without breaking what it was meant to protect. Finally, Harris wrote the cost in currency Lily might understand. If the truth surfaced whole, insurance would claw back, civil suits would stack, her trust would freeze, reporters would want her story, cameras would demand her pain. What was it like to discover your mother alive? Did your father stage grief? Did you feel complicit? Judges would make polite noises about privacy before issuing subpoenas. Friends would tilt their heads in hallways. Her life would become evidence in a trial she never chose to attend. He reread the letter. Each paragraph sounded like a match head. He could hear the explosion already. Its radius centered on a young woman who had crossed a stage smiling. He tried to write a paragraph that would soften the blast. It turned into instructions for surviving shrapnel. He looked at the clock. His daughter would be home soon, freckles bright from soccer, asking for garlic crust pizza. He looked back at the pages, the ink still damp, the weight unbearable. Oaths were clean, lives were not. Being a good man wasn't always the same as being a loud one. He stood, carried the pages to the sink, and struck a match. The corner curled, the words blackened, the ink ghosted. Paragraph by paragraph, the truth surrendered into smoke. The ash in the basin looked ordinary, like any failed recipe, indistinguishable from dinners gone wrong. He rinsed it down the drain, let water carry away what might have detonated a young woman's life. Back at the station, Harris filed a report about a petty theft. A wallet returned by a neighbor, nothing missing but time. He answered emails, penciled in court dates, placed his palm briefly on the Ward folder, then moved his hand away. Ritual was not the same as courage. That night he stood in his daughter's doorway. She slept with her mouth open, one arm flung across a stuffed dog worn soft from years of wash cycles. He waited for certainty to arrive. It didn't. He chose anyway. Sometimes being a good man meant being a smaller kind of hero than the badge promised. You take the weight you can carry. You refuse the kind that would crush a child with someone else's story. He hoped he was right. He would never know. That was the price of not detonating truth, forfeiting the satisfaction of aftermath. In the morning, he would tie his tie and walk back into a city that still believed light fixed everything. And in a quiet house, a girl would continue to grow up without learning the vocabulary of depositions. On paper, nothing had happened. In truth, that was exactly the point. Samuel stood with Ethan on a rooftop overlooking the Sound, the same rail where years ago Ethan had tested the city for honesty. Wind curled off the water, carrying salt and glassy rain. For a long while neither spoke. Then Samuel asked the question he had rehearsed since the funeral that wasn't. The envelope, the DNA test, did you ever open it? Ethan didn't blink. No, I burned it. Samuel frowned. Without knowing. Knowing is overrated, Ethan said. Fatherhood isn't paperwork, it's jurisdiction. I claimed it the day I chose Lily would never inherit our mistakes. I set the table, learned her laugh, built her future free of anyone else's lies. That's paternity enough. Samuel studied his brother's face, the city lights reflected in glass towers behind him. What he saw wasn't victory, but stewardship. A man who had outlived vengeance but not yet found peace. Ethan's empire had not only survived the storm, but thrived. Shareholders applauded his resilience. Journalists made him a case study in leadership under tragedy. But he never said the word victory. Only custody. Only custodian. Down in Montana, Bethany Hale lived by slower rhythms. She climbed narrow stairs to her apartment with groceries, balanced ledgers at the hardware store, kept her balcony bare except for a stubborn plant that refused to die. Each month an envelope slipped under her door. Photos of Lily laughing at a science fair, celebrating birthdays, standing in sunlight that no longer smelled of citrus. Bethany would weep quietly, grief and gratitude braided so tightly no knife could separate them. Happiness, she realized, could be measured not in miracles, but in the absence of alarms. For Lily, the years unfolded cleanly. She excelled in school, built friendships, discovered how to laugh as though tomorrow was abundant. She knew her father as the man who always showed up, every recital, every late-night worry patched with gentle words. She believed her mother had died quickly and loved her fiercely, and that belief became her inheritance. Ethan never let her see how much it cost to guard that belief. At night, sometimes, he opened the desk drawer and touched the sealed jar of ash from the burned DNA envelope. Not proof, not evidence, just a reminder that some truths, once revealed, would demand casualties. He preferred ash. On another rooftop, years later, Ethan stood again, staring out at Seattle's endless arteries. Trains sliding like veins, planes lifting like second thoughts into the clouds. Revenge had done its work, dismantling betrayal. Justice had done its work, documenting theft and caging predators. Mercy had appeared only once, unannounced, when Bethany slipped into a graduation ceremony and Ethan chose not to ruin the moment. What survived was not him, not her, not even the empire. What survived was Lily, untouched, unburdened, allowed to grow without carrying receipts from her parents' war. That, he thought, was the only victory anyone would remember correctly. And that brings us to the end of this gripping story. They said my wife was dead, but she was in my bed. Betrayal and revenge. Betrayal always comes with a price, and sometimes revenge is not about destruction. It's about protecting what truly matters. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Would you have chosen justice or mercy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our Cheating Stories 7 community for more powerful tales of betrayal, karma, and unexpected revenge. Until next time, stay strong, stay wise, and remember, every choice writes a story.